back to the governance committee, and the governance committee met last week, and there were some concerns about not having anything in that subsection, so the verbiage that we came up with is on the new draft, and it states that motorhomes, vacation trailers, boat trailers, camperettes, and all other vehicles are permitted to be parked in driveways and front yard setback, provided they do not encroach on the public sidewalks or other public right-of-way. These vehicles may be parked in the required side or rear yards.
And let's see, a couple questions. I mean, I'm reading this, a couple issues in the language of and all other vehicles. What's to distinguish of an all other vehicle? We're pretty specific in the first four variables, but we throw pretty much all-encompassing all other vehicle statement in there. I have a little bit of a concern with that. And then we talk about be parked in driveways in the front yard setback. So distinguishing a driveway from a front yard setback, you know, is it one or both? Are we talking both? You could be parked in the driveway or on the front yard setback.
No, the front yard setback is you take the front of the house and go forward. There's a required setback from the property line to make room for whatever needs to be. There's a requirement to have a setback, but it also addresses the front yard period. And the old ordinance didn't really address the driveway as being a place that you can utilize. And so another part of the ordinance, if I'm not mistaken, Gary can correct me on this if I'm wrong, is you can't, the idea is not to park in the yards. So by defining the driveway now and making the driveway usable, it's in the front yard setback. So that's why they kind of go hand in hand. You're restricted to parking in the driveways that are in the front yard setback. Some driveways go on the side of the house, but most driveways in our modern construction are in the front yard setback. And right now, the way the old ordinance is written, if you leave your car parked there more than 48 hours, you're not compliant. But parking in your driveway, that's what the driveway's for. So we wanted to write this. One of the things we also want to come up with is some definitions for some of these so that it's clear. Because when we got feedback from, was it AWC or Mercy? Can't remember.
The land use attorney.
Okay. She had some concerns, and one of them was that we didn't have any definitions.
Right.
And some of the other concerns we were able to vet, and others will probably just comply with.
So what is
If you go to the whole ordinance, under paragraph A, subsection 1, it says, in any district, driveway, or access way, providing ingress or egress to or from public or private areas or parking spaces shall be permitted, together with any appropriate traffic control devices in any required yard. Then you go down to section 2, and that contradicts that. But in part A of section 2, it says required parking spaces shall be permitted on driveways in the required front yard in conjunction with any single family or two-family dwelling on a single lot. So it already covers parking in the driveways.
I'm just trying to understand, because all you've given me is a section 2, so that's all I'm able to read. I'll go look at the whole parking ordinances. But these vehicles may be parked in the required side or rear yard. So what is required side?
Okay. The code requires 2 side yards for each property, except for corner lots, which only have 1 side yard, because a corner lot has 1.5 front yards. It adjoins it's adjacent to 2 streets. And the minimum required distance on 1 side yard is 10 feet to allow for parking of boat home, motor homes, camper trailers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get some understanding of definitions of,
Josh brought up a good point last time we discussed this, and in the old language, that's where we're recommending people park. It says that's where they're permitted to be located.
45-day limit? It used to be no living in a trailer at all.
We have a 45-day limit.
A lot of cities have it, some are 30, some are 60.
Why would it be?
The idea is for out-of-town guests,
Out of
park
town
your
guests,
car
yeah.
right for a while, not for you to live in your house.
Right.
The other thing that I remember, of course, it's been a few weeks, so, is we had asked, if we're gonna strike this, and part of the concern of the public safety element was to come back with an idea of how we would address this in the public safety piece. So have we worked on that?
The public safety in section 8 covers, nuisances and junk vehicles. It's not addressed yet in Title 8 of which is health and safety.
But I think the concern, at least when Leanne and I talked about it, was maybe blocking the view, that kind of stuff.
Right, here's the problem, is you're using a zoning ordinance to enforce a safety hazard that's not addressed in health and safety. It's an improper application of the law.
But the ask was to bring back something drafting that, something that will address it in that section.
And we also asked for anyone on council to give us a recommendation on how to do that too.
Because it's not addressed in the original.
It's not addressed in the original.
It's not presently addressed by itself.
No, I understand, but, I mean, and I can go out and try to find examples if that's what the committee wants, but I thought that was the purpose of the committee, is to
Well, we're working on it, but we need to address things one at a time, and this is the one that we're currently trying to address. We understand there needs to be an issue with safety on the health and safety side, but you're targeting the vehicle aspect of it and ignoring the fences, the hedges, the trees. There's a lot of things that are being ignored and need to be addressed, and so that has to be addressed in totality, not by trying to apply a zoning ordinance to a health and safety issue.
There's also a requirement that it be a substantial government interest, and so it has to be substantiated as being a viable issue, since there's not been a single accident involving obstructed vision in the city. When I back out, I back up no faster than 40 miles an hour. I think most people back out about 1 or 2 miles an hour, and they're very careful. And most people that own recreational type vehicles are some of the safest drivers in the world.
Now, according to council, this needs to, I'm trying to remember, I don't have it in front of me, it needs a public hearing and it needs to go to planning commission, is that correct, or does it just need a public hearing?
According to the attorney, it needs to go to the state for review as well.
Right, yeah, because it's part of that.
Actually, RCW 35A.63.100, municipal authority for zoning. No zoning ordinance or amendment thereto shall be enacted by the legislative body without at least one public hearing, notice of which shall be given as set forth in RCW 35A.63.070. Such hearing may be held before the planning agency or the Board of Adjustment or such other body as the legislative body shall designate. That's the only requirement.
Well, according to the attorney, it does, and that's in a separate section of code, so
Under growth management.
yeah, that's under Growth Management Act, which added lots of things that aren't referenced elsewhere.
One thing I've learned out of this process is now I know why we have ordinances that were passed 40 years ago, ordinances that were passed to contradict them 20 years later, and ordinances that contradict those 10 years later, and ordinances that contradict those 5 years later, because the process of eliminating a bad ordinance is extremely difficult. So what councils tend to do is just add on to the current, is just write a new ordinance altogether without any regard to what's already on the books, because it's so difficult to remove them, based on what that attorney sent us, and that's...
Well, any change to zoning requires all of that process. A new zoning ordinance would as well.
So, that's what I'm learning out of this. I mean, I just saw that city in Minnesota just went through and threw out 2/3 of their ordinances, because they went through and found that most of them either weren't being enforced or they weren't applicable anymore. And that's what we hope to do with this committee, but if every single ordinance we bring up, the question, it takes us 6 weeks to fix, we'll never get through it.
So to repeal an ordinance, we have to have
If
a
it's,
hearing
if it's
and
in zoning,
this is zoning.
yeah.
I don't like zoning.
That's, I believe, one reason why, lots of places try to have a big package of zoning changes go through at once, is that it lets you go through that whole state process and hearing process once for the whole package, instead of each paragraph needing its own filing with the state and its own public hearing.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that does make it slower and more cumbersome.
Health and safety ordinances don't require the same, measures that zoning ordinances do.
Right, but since this is currently in zoning,
Yeah.
and that is where a lot of cities put it.
But again, we gotta understand the intent. The intent was to define the parking areas on the lots at the time. And now we need to redefine it. You know, one of the concerns she had was whether lot sizes, she had a question about whereas where, you know, she didn't feel that our lot sizes probably changed since then, but they have. I mean, we now have lot sizes down to 3,500 square feet.
I think, the point on that, and that is actually another issue on this one, is now it has no findings of fact on it. And I believe we typically, for a zoning, are supposed to have some sort of justifications in the findings section of it before we, impose rules.
The recitals,
Yeah.
we need to wordsmith the recitals a
Yeah.
little bit, but.
Yeah. So what's council's pleasure on this, continue working on it?
Continue working on it, work on the recitals.
All right.
And then does there need to be a public hearing scheduled?
I don't think it's there yet.
Okay.
Okay, next on the agenda, findings of fact on the interim. No, we already did that one. Marijuana work plan, sorry, yep, there we go.
Okay.
The other piece she found out.
So I put together a draft work plan. The only thing I want to read to you is the purpose, direction, and desired results. So the purpose of this work group is to collect data that will be used to determine the feasibility of allowing the production, distribution, retail sales of both recreational and medical marijuana within the city of Pacific. The direction given is a work group shall be organized, and it has been, with members from the city council, planning commission, citizens, industry, and staff. This work will be done in a manner that promotes the following guiding values, which are pride of city, integrity, courage, and respect. This work group will address any and all concerns presented to it to determine the legal issues with allowing marijuana-based businesses to operate in the city of Pacific. Desired results: answer any and all possible questions regarding these types of businesses using facts, laws, regulations, and statistical analysis to allow a list of pros and cons to be weighted by the city council, who has the task of deciding whether to allow or disallow these businesses to operate within the city of Pacific. Also collect enough information to allow the planning commission and city staff to draft proposed regulations for city council to consider, should the council decide to allow these types of businesses to operate within the city of Pacific. So basically what we want, you know, at the bottom you'll see there's a list of bullet points that list a bunch of things that need to be determined. I wanted to give this to council during workshops so that council could go through, look at the list, determine if there's any concerns that you have regarding these types of businesses, forward those concerns to this work group so that they can answer any of the questions using the information that I've provided so that it can be vetted. If there's a concern that will the businesses be allowed to operate within 1,000 feet of a school? And, well, we can go back and show under 502 initiative in the state law, no zoning will allow businesses within 1,000 feet of a school. It's vetted. It's not no longer a concern. And to be able to go through check by check, you know, list of concerns and check off, you know, with hard evidence on how it's going to be done. And then, you know, and this is concerns for allowing these businesses in. If we find out there's a concern, you know, social concerns, and we got statistical analysis to prove that we should be concerned about it, that'll be under a con for allowing them, you know, and other, you know, some of the other stuff will be under pros, and then when it's brought back to council, we'll have all the facts and supporting documentation that says, we answered this concern and found the answer to it here. It's a code issue, you know, where do you find it in the building code? Where do you find it in electrical code? Where's it at in the fire code? And that'll all be referenced, and then we'll have a list of pros and cons, and then council will have complete information to make a good, solid decision on whether these businesses should operate within the city. And if they shouldn't, you got the justification there also why they shouldn't. You know, rather than just being a whim and your opinion, it's, look, we did work, we decided this is why we're not gonna allow it, or this is why we said we will allow it. We got all the supporting documentation to support, you know, all those concerns. And then after that decision's made, if it's decided that we'll allow it, then the planning commission will take all that information and draft language for a proposed ordinance.
Council discussion?
It is important if you have any concerns that aren't listed on this, that you forward them so that we can get them addressed and added to this. Because the one thing I don't want to do is get all these people together, have them, give them their homework assignment, go out and find all this information, we consolidate it, we vet it, we ensure that the information is accurate, bring it to council, and council goes, well, did you consider this? And it's something we didn't think about, and it kind of torpedoes the process. If we don't get the concerns out in the open now, it makes it difficult to research the answers.
So, I have a question, and I have not been able to get a legislator or even Congressman Reichert to answer this question regarding selling or issuing a business license. Because myself, as well as council member, we all took an oath to uphold the laws of state and federal laws, and how, you know, we can create ordinances. And I can't get an answer. Nobody can answer that question for me of how we break our oath of office by allowing business because our own PNC says we will not issue a business license for something that's illegal federally.
I'm looking at it from this standpoint. The state has decided to invoke state rights. The only power the federal government has is with the purse strings. That's why we comply with all the federal laws. If you don't comply, you don't get any federal funding for any of your projects. And so that's why we comply with federal laws. You know, interstate commerce has a lot to do with our need to comply with federal laws. The state's going to invoke state rights, and the feds are saying they're going to turn a blind eye to it unless it becomes a problem. And then they'll come in and enforce it. And the way I see it is, I understand. I'm troubled with that too, and I don't know how to respond to it. You know, I'm not an advocate for marijuana, but I want to make sure that we're not denying people their rights in the same process.
Right.
And if the state constitution is going to provide them the right to do this, then, you know, how do we deny people their constitutional rights to the state? It's not against your constitutional rights at the federal level. It's just a presidential proclamation or whatever. Was it Nixon or someone basically made it a Class 1 drug? You know, he added it to the list.
Actually, passed in 1928.
Oh, so it's been way back.
And then repassed in 1970.
Okay, so and it wasn't done through Congress. It was done by the president, wasn't it?
It was act of Congress. It was actually a law.
That must have been in 28.
Yeah.
Okay. Then Nixon created it, what level of drug it would be through his powers. So, you know, and if we're going to invoke state rights, which is pretty clear that's what the state is going to do, then, you know, we are in a little bit of a quagmire, but I just think we got to look at it as an exception and move on.
People gave up that thought option.
Yeah.
Actually, one suggestion that I have seen on that is that we provide what we currently do not have, a definition of what it means to be in compliance with federal law in our code, and to say that that means that you are in compliance with federal law as it is currently interpreted and enforced by the federal government. So that as long as there is an assurance from the federal government that they are not enforcing this law, then we are free to treat it as being in compliance with the law. Now, whether that really works, I don't know, because actually even thornier issue for the constitutional scholars is that this is covered by treaty obligations of the United States, which require us to prohibit the sale of marijuana at the federal level, and treaties trump the Constitution. Treaties are the supreme law of the land over and above the Constitution. And we do actually have a treaty that says we can't do this. But to some extent, it's ridiculous that a small city is the one trying to work our way through all of this. We are a creature of the state. We derive our power from the state. If the state has chosen to say that marijuana is legal,
To me, it becomes an issue at the state for the governor and the legislature to decide.
yeah, we just don't want to get caught in the crossfire between the state government and the federal government because we're smaller than both of them.
Right. I don't think we will.
So if the federal government came in and said, okay, we're gonna enforce our federal law, then we would have to comply.
Basically, they would shut those businesses down,
Right,
arrest all the
if they were
people,
told
file
by the
charges
federal
against them. And all these businesses know that going into this.
Yeah, that's been
All it
possible
takes
all
is
along.
a change of administration or a change in the Attorney General, to take it away from them.
Or like the California district, an attorney general who doesn't decide to abide by the federal policy.
Right, or and you get the state that says, no, we're gonna invoke our rights, and you don't have a right to tell us what to do, because as long as it stays in our state, doesn't cross state lines, they can't, we do have some powers that the federal government cannot dictate over us, and so that, to me, that it goes back to a state thing. And then we still gotta be in the mindset that even if we don't want it, we say no, we still need to be prepared for the legislature to say, you can't deny it, because that's a possibility still as well. So even if we don't want it, we still need to have some draft language in place that if the state comes out and says, no, you will allow these businesses, then we can't pass another moratorium. I mean, it seems kind of ridiculous that it's being drug out this far, this long. And so the idea behind this work group is to make sure that we have something in place regardless. Even if we say no, we still need the planning commission to have draft language available. So if the state comes out and says, no, you will allow it, then we can implement our ordinance at that time.
I have a question for the mayor, whether SCA and TIC have taken up this issue with all the other cities.
Well, when I was down at the conference, AWC conference, it was discussed, the Liquor Control Board even came in at one of our sessions. And everybody's in the same boat. All the cities are feeling the same way. Why is it left with us to have to make these decisions? It's kind of like the cart was put before the horse. And now, what Colorado did is they had the rules in place before they passed it, and so we're kind of flip-flop. We're backwards trying to set the rules, and I brought it up with Congressman Reichert, and I also brought it up with both Freeman and Kutchmar, representatives. We're stuck. We're a small city. We don't have the resources to figure all of this out, but yet we're left holding the bag to have to figure it out. We don't have a choice.
And we get none of the funding.
Exactly. And right now, there is $0 coming back to the city.
Yes. It's just sales tax.
And to what you just said about how can we took an oath to uphold the laws. What cities are allowing marijuana growing or retail or processing? What's the justification for those city council members for going with it?
And I haven't asked them, it was a question I just asked, right? As the federal, federal congressman, what is your thought? His thoughts are, he's totally against it. He's not in favor of the law, of it being,
but it's a law.
There's a lot of, there's safety issues. There's a huge safety risk that comes with this, and I'm sure the committee's going to address this. This is a cash-only business. There's no bank even taking the money.
No,
That changed.
That has
Did it
recently
change?
changed. The federal government has directed them to accept funds.
Oh, so Bank of America
Okay.
is gonna be open.
So, but that was one of my biggest concerns, and I didn't see that had changed, but,
And one of the things is, have a recommendation for how council, what ordinances need to be changed to allow it. You know, including our ordinance on.
Is that a zoning thing? Okay.
Well, we will have zoning language, so probably will have to.
and I think we've already were looking at, Paula had started that draft, and we were looking at 1,000 feet from schools, parks, you know, and it really limits the areas where it can be allowed. I think it's pretty much, the Pierce County area, which was really interesting to me because I believe Pierce County itself has a ban.
I think it's only up close to the percent.
But I
It's
don't know
not
how you
gonna
get
be
around
an
that.
easy one, that's why the work group isn't making a recommendation, they're just collecting facts.
And there's a lot, and I know Paula is going to be, has been a wealth of information, and she has shown me the binders that she has ready to present to the group, and I'm sure she mentioned it, and I really appreciate you, Councilmember Kave, for taking the lead on this and moving forward with it. And I'm just going to reiterate that there's no staff time really available to work on this, so, other than what needs to be done as it gets filled in.
I anticipate there being less staff time
That's what
required
I'm really hoping, because she's
than
very.
if it was still with the planning commission. My understanding of the way the planning commission works, she has to put everything together and they just give a thumbs up or thumbs down.
And
They
you're very
don't
right.
do a lot of homework, and we got people here that are willing to go out and actually do the work, and that's
I'm looking at
what's gonna
people
make
on the
this difference.
committee, it looks like you have a very rounded, well-established committee, I mean, I'm pretty impressed.
How many are in the group?
I think it's eight of us total. 9 counting Paula.
The reason I brought up the FCA in particular is because I'd be interested in hearing what the other cities are considering and the impact of them. I know what you got for the EWC, but every one of the cities in the FCA are involved in this.
Right.
And have to deal with it. And some have already made some decisions,
And most of them are fans.
but not all of them.
I know, but most.
Yeah, but the ones that aren't,
The ones surrounding us.
ones that aren't,
For
are
example,
interesting.
Kent County's sued right now, so that's gonna really help us determine what our rights are gonna be as a city legislative body to determine what we can allow and not allow.
Right, but we don't know how long that's gonna go on, so we don't have the luxury of waiting to see what the
Right.
outcome of that.
We still we gotta move forward with this, at least have something in place.
Exactly.
King County either is or has already about to make a planning change to specifically allow marijuana in unincorporated areas in King County where it's not currently allowed. So they've got some legal advice on their side. On the other hand, they have much deeper pockets.
What I got out of the FCA meeting that I did go to, and we read the emails, is that they're leaving the decision up to the cities, they're not taking a position. The big concern is if the cities are gonna allow it, the cities need to share in the revenue. Because right now, there is no revenue sharing.
So, and that's one of the things with FCA, like you said, they get really skittish when it comes to controversial, and they want the cities to be united on a front and not have all the division amongst the other cities when they take a stand on something. There's another reason why they just assume that the cities kind of figure out where it's at. And we were
Everyone's
really
united on the funding.
Yeah, and, you know, and we were really hoping to see a little bit more activity out of the legislature, you know, and to get a little bit more direction, and unfortunately.
What I noticed is as soon as Colorado published that they made $2 million in taxes in the first month, the state suddenly got rid of the 10% they were offering cities, and it went to zero. That's what passed.
Well, you know why? Because they anticipated making $75 million in a year, and they only made $2 million in a month, so it's like a third of what they were anticipating for revenue. That was one of the other things when you talk about the tax. It's like, it's taxed every step of the way, the growing, the processing, and the retail. So by the time it's at the retail, I think Mayor Hill had figured out it's like 87% tax.
There was a report on medical marijuana. In Colorado, Colorado, and they talked to a drug dealer that dealt with marijuana. He says his business is booming because he's not being, his prices are not being taxed, and the cost to go through the legal portion is higher. So he's not seeing any restriction at all in his sales whatsoever. So,
But
it's an interesting little
one thing,
sidebar.
by having the tax, is it can step up enforcement on illegal operations. Because right now, all states rely on federal funds, and those funds have been severely restricted. The Washington State was lucky to get $1 million grant to go out and do their interdiction program, and the state's bringing in, Colorado owns excise taxes at 15%, we're at 25%, and believe a much higher population, and I think we'll see a lot more funding available to go do that enforcement of the illegal operations. Right now, in Washington State, most of the work being done is after they've been found through fire or being turned in, or, drug deals going bad type thing.
Further council discussion? Does this require any sort of council action to approve?
Nope, this was just designed to bring you up to date and to get you to read the document and provide input. Just send me the emails and I'll update the plan.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thanks, appreciate it.
We got 3 citizens.
Right?
We got 3 citizens to step up, get involved. I mean, I'm glad, only 8 people.
Future planning commission.
Any further council discussion?
You're looking at me, I
I
can do it.
have one thing to bring up here.
I know,
Action audit, we have to make sure we do not have a quorum, right? Okay, so,
What date again is it?
tomorrow, 1 o'clock.
I can't be there.
I can be there.
I was planning on being there unless somebody else wishes to.
Who else is gonna be?
I can be there.
I'll be there, of course, but
Wow.
it doesn't matter.
If it's
I'm working, I can't be there.
I can't make it.
So,
Yeah, so we can
3 of
go.
us at the most.
Right,
I'll try to
worry about that, okay. So now I'll make a big deal out of it, forget it.
I heard about that.
Somebody called.
Excellent.
Alrighty, then we are done for the evening, thank you.